My name is Emily Calhoun. I'm 45 years old and I serve as a Rear Admiral in the United States Navy. But none of that mattered today. Not in Port Clarendon. Not at my sister's wedding. To the Navy, I'm a strategist, someone who's led crews through high-pressure operations, someone trusted to make decisions that can tip the balance of international waters. But to my family, I'm just a problem in a white uniform. An eyesore they never figured out how to hide. And today, in a town that worships manicured traditions and 5-layer cakes, I was the ghost no one invited, but everyone expected to behave. I drove along the coast that morning with the ocean on my left and a storm growing silently inside my chest. The invitation had been formal, cold addressed to the Calhoun family residence, Norfolk. Not to me, not even by name. The RSVP code didn't come with a note or a call. No one asked if I'd be flying in. And I was foolish enough to think I'd still go. The air smelled like salt and sea roses as I approached the hotel. A memory from Annapolis flickered, white caps tossed into the air at graduation, 2 empty seats in the stands where my parents should have been. I buried it. I was used to the hollow space where family should have existed. But then my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. Emily, for God's sake, don't wear your uniform to the wedding. It's inappropriate. This day isn't about you. The breath I didn't know I was holding left me in a single sharp exhale. That uniform carried decades of sacrifice, silence, and earned respect. And she wanted it hidden again. She didn't care that I'd crossed oceans in that uniform. She only cared that it might clash with champagne linens. They wanted me small, silent, unseen. I turned off the engine and stared straight ahead at the grand facade of the Chandler Hotel. My hand hovered over the garment bag in the back seat. They were expecting a quiet guest in beige. They were about to meet a Rear Admiral in full dress whites. And this time, I wasn't asking permission. I didn't walk into that hotel like a woman attending a family celebration. I walked in like I was preparing for combat. The lobby of the Chandler was everything I remembered, overly polished, designed to impress people who already thought they were impressive. Crystal chandeliers glinted in the high ceilings. The scent of expensive florals floated over marble tile. A pianist in the corner played something soft and forgettable. None of it felt real. The front desk clerk smiled too brightly when she saw me approach, scanning me from my tidy ponytail to the wheels of the overnight bag behind me. She asked for my name, but when I gave it, Rear Admiral Emily Calhoun, she blinked and hesitated. Not Emily. Not Miss Calhoun. Rear Admiral. She entered something quickly into the computer and handed me my room key without meeting my eyes. Room 426, a corner suite, the kind my parents used to book for Eliza on school trips or holidays. Correction, Lauren. Her name was Lauren now. Lauren Calhoun. The golden child who always knew how to smile for cameras and tilt her head just so in family portraits. The wedding was tomorrow, but the first blow had already landed. That text from my mother still sat unread on my phone, its sting pulsing through my thoughts. Don't wear your uniform. It's inappropriate. Not, we can't wait to see you. Not welcome back. Not even safe travels. Just that, don't. I let myself into the room. It was elegant, soft, full of creams and pale blues. The kind of space where women wore chiffon and discussed honeymoon destinations over tea. I didn't sit down. I walked straight to the closet, opened the garment bag, and ran my fingers along the collar of my dress whites. It was clean-pressed, immaculate. The 2 silver stars gleamed. I could feel the weight of them even before I put it on. They wanted me to hide this. They wanted me to pretend it didn't exist. I wasn't surprised. This was not new. It had been happening for years, in tiny increments, in sharp silences, in half phrases and veiled jokes about Emily's world versus the rest of us. But what struck me that day was the clarity of it. The tone, the timing. They had erased me from the engagement announcement. They had seated me at the friends of the family table at the rehearsal dinner next to a woman who asked if I still did Navy stuff. And now they wanted to erase the last thing that tied me to who I really was, my uniform. The very thing they had never come to see me earn. I sat down on the edge of the bed, stiff and too upright the way I do when I'm reviewing casualty reports or preparing for an intelligence briefing. That same alert quiet settled into me. Then I stood up. I didn't trust myself to sit still too long. I knew where my mind would go, back to that day in Annapolis. The first time I wore that uniform in public. The stadium had been packed, flags waving, cameras clicking. Rows of new officers stood tall as our names were called. Some cried, some laughed, some just looked dazed with exhaustion. I looked up at the section I'd marked on the ticket confirmation. Row H. Seats 12 and 13, empty. 2 navy blue chairs under a sharp June sun. My father had called that morning from Hong Kong. Something's come up, he'd said. A meeting with a logistics firm. We can't miss it. My mother's voice had floated in behind him. We're so proud, darling. And Lauren has her tennis regional in Boston, remember? I hadn't answered. There was nothing left to say. The photo from that day, me with 3 roommates, all smiling, still sits in my desk drawer. I smile too, but only if you look quickly. If you linger, you'll see the hollow where pride should have been. The kind of pride I saw in every other parent's face that day. After the graduation, I returned to my quarters alone. A week later, I received a courier envelope. Inside, a check for $5,000 and a card that said, "Buy yourself something nice. Maybe a strand of pearls." I remember holding the check. The way the paper bent. How the edges fluttered when the air conditioning kicked on. And then I tore it into 27 even pieces and let them fall into the trash can like confetti for a party that never happened. Back in the present, I heard a faint knock at the hotel room door. I checked the peephole room service. Apparently, someone had ordered lunch for me. The tray held a chopped salad and a bottle of sparkling water. No note. Just a printed card. Compliments of the bride and groom. A peace offering. A passive reminder to behave. I stared at it, then closed the door without a word. The salad sat untouched on the desk for the rest of the afternoon. I didn't need food. I needed focus. I checked my calendar. I had 16 hours until the ceremony, and I had a decision to make. Did I show up quietly and give them what they wanted, blend in? Nod politely, watch my sister's life unfold in curated perfection from the corner of a rented ballroom? Or did I remind them without speaking a single word exactly who I had become? I zipped the garment bag closed again, careful not to wrinkle the seams. They didn't want my stars in their photos, but I had no intention of hiding them anymore. The last time I walked into that house, it didn't feel like coming home. It felt like walking into a curated museum, one I'd been erased from. Lauren's photographs covered the walls like an exhibit, glossy framed, lit just right. Her on horseback, arms raised in victory. Her glowing at prom with our parents on either side. Her acceptance letters to Dartmouth and Columbia preserved behind museum-grade glass. There was no trace of me, not until you searched the far shelf in the library behind a stack of untouched Dickens novels, where a single photo gathered dust. Me in my dress whites, standing beside 3 women my family never bothered to know. No caption, no frame, no pride. I should have known what the wedding would be. The last time I visited Port Clarendon was months after the Orion incident. Shore leave, a rare one. I should have used it to rest. Instead, I'd gone home still chasing the fantasy that a near disaster might have shaken them into perspective. That dinner put the last nail in the coffin. My father, as usual, spoke in headlines. He asked about defense contracts like they were sports scores. My mother offered unsolicited advice about career transitions into something more elegant. Lauren wrinkled her nose when I mentioned a rescue op. Ugh, can we not talk about scary war stuff at dinner, she said, stabbing a piece of asparagus. That was her house, her table, her rules. I excused myself early and found my phone charging in the study. On the way back, I passed Lauren's old bedroom, still pristine, like it had never been abandoned. The door was ajar. On her desk sat piles of bridal catalogs and a spreadsheet glowing on the laptop screen. Seating priority. I scanned the list. Parents of the groom, maid of honor, grandparents, childhood friends. Then toward the bottom, miscellaneous relatives, non-essential. Beside it, Emily, back row. I stepped away like the screen had burned me. Even here in the heart of her preserved childhood, I was optional. The next morning, I left before sunrise. No one noticed. Now, the day before the wedding, I made one last attempt to play their game. I went to the Chandler Hotel to verify the seating chart. The planner, a young woman named Chloe, greeted me with the tight politeness of someone caught between loyalty and dread. "Admiral Calhoun," she said, flustered. "We weren't expecting you so early." I had a few questions, I said, specifically about the seating. She hesitated. "You're at table 12 near the secondary entrance. We thought it might be more convenient." For who, I asked. She didn't answer. Across the room, Lauren was adjusting flowers with our mother, both in cream trench coats, both absorbed in a world that excluded me effortlessly. I didn't approach them. I walked outside back to the car and sat behind the wheel without turning the engine on. 10 minutes passed in silence. I wasn't disappointed anymore. This was data, patterns, behavior, repetition, every variable constant. They didn't want me included. They wanted me quiet. Back in the hotel room that night, I stood by the window and watched the coastline disappear into dusk. I thought about all the empty seats in my life, not just physical ones, but emotional ones. The family holidays I missed, the birthdays no one called about, the achievements that sat unopened in inboxes. The pattern wasn't new. I had just stopped trying to solve it. They had made their choice, and now I was making mine. Tomorrow I would show up one last time, but not under their rules. There's a special kind of silence that comes after betrayal. It's not loud. It doesn't scream, it just settles. Heavy. Still. Like the air before a storm that never really ends. That silence filled my apartment the night I saw the engagement post. I had just returned from a joint forces operation off the Florida coast. A 12-day exercise with 3 ships and 2 aircraft squadrons, exhausting, tight, relentless. My body ached from steel decks and sun glare. All I wanted was a shower, a glass of water, and one night of being unseen. I was still in uniform when I dropped my keys onto the counter and opened my tablet. I don't usually check social media. It feels like a different planet, one built on filters and fantasies. But that night something pulled me there. Habit, curiosity, maybe even hope. The first image was impossible to ignore. Lauren, twirling in a pale silk dress caught mid-spin on the dock of the Clarendon Yacht Club. Her arms around a man I didn't recognize. The caption read, "She said yes, the future Mr. and Mrs. Halpern." My chest didn't collapse. It didn't ache. It just paused. Like my body was waiting for instructions it no longer knew how to follow. Hundreds of comments flooded the post. My mother had left a trail of red hearts and champagne flutes. My father had reposted the image with a glowing statement, proud to build a legacy of love and strength. I kept scrolling. Lauren with her fiancé. Lauren with their friends. Lauren with our parents, both of them glowing in linen and gold. I searched for my name. Nothing. Not in the tags. Not in the comments. Not even a throwaway mention. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. I wasn't part of that joy. I wasn't part of that legacy. I was a ghost in their family story. I closed the tablet. That same silence, the one from graduation day, from the rehearsal dinner table, from every empty chair in my past, crawled back into the room and sat beside me. A week later, a thick ivory envelope arrived in my mailbox. The kind my mother always favored. Heavy cardstock, scented with something subtle and expensive lily of the valley, her signature. It was addressed not to me, but to the Calhoun residence, Norfolk, VA. Not Rear Admiral, not even Emily, just the house. Inside was the wedding invitation, all embossed swirls and pastel trim. A QR code for RSVP, no handwritten note, no personal message, no warmth. A summons, not an invitation. My presence had been processed like a clerical obligation. I was allowed to attend. I was not being welcomed. I held the envelope for a long time, long enough to wonder if this was what Lauren wanted or what our parents had engineered. Probably both. Lauren had always known how to win their affection. She was fluent in the family language aesthetics influence charm. I was not. I was fluent in silence, in tension, in protocols under pressure, in loyalty that couldn't be purchased. So I RSVP'd. Yes, not because I wanted to go, because ghosts deserve their hauntings. That night I called Ben Carter. I didn't expect comfort. I didn't want it. I just needed to say the words out loud. He picked up on the second ring. Admiral, his voice was steady. No surprise, no pleasantries. Ben, I said, she's getting married. There was a pause, just one heartbeat of air. Then he exhaled slowly. I see. They don't want me there, not really. They want the photos without the questions. They want their perfect tableau. Another pause. I could imagine him at his desk, eyes fixed on some fixed point beyond the horizon. They don't want an admiral in the pictures I added. They want a ghost. He didn't argue. didn't tell me I was wrong. That's what I needed from him, no false comfort. Just truth. Ma'am, he said finally, his voice quiet but certain. Ghosts are nothing but light that makes shadows. And your light's bright enough to black out their whole damn skyline. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Those words didn't heal the wound. But they sealed it. Cleanly, finally. When I ended the call, I stood at my closet and pulled open the doors. My dress whites hung there in silence, stiff with purpose. The 2 silver stars on the shoulders gleamed in the lamplight. They had tried to turn them into shame, but they were armor. Not decoration, not provocation. Truth. I took the uniform out of the bag and laid it gently on the bed. Pressed it smooth with my hands, checked each button. There was no doubt anymore. They would not remember what I did, but they would remember what I wore. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Bright sky, clean desk, nothing remarkable, until I saw the name flash across my screen. Richard Calhoun. I stared at it. My father didn't call, not even on birthdays. If he reached out, it was through my mother's layered, curated voice. So I hesitated before answering, my hand still on the corner of a personnel file I'd been reviewing. Emily, he said, warm and easy, like this was something we did often. It's been too long. That voice, it threw me off more than I wanted to admit. Polished, measured, not his usual clipped transactional tone. He asked about my health, about the weather in Norfolk, about fleet movements he'd probably read about in the Wall Street Journal. It was almost paternal. And for one foolish moment, I leaned in. I answered. I responded. I offered small details, the kind of facts we're trained to withhold, but still consider harmless, unclassified updates about a new sonar program, fleet expansion plans. Things I thought might earn his interest in a genuine way. We spoke for 10 minutes, the longest conversation we'd had in years. I let my guard down. And just like that, the trap closed. So he said, easing into it like a veteran negotiator, you're still working on that next-gen sonar platform, right? Yes, I said, slower now. He chuckled. Well, turns out someone I've partnered with is bidding on that contract. I said nothing. Vice Admiral Ryland Croft. You remember him? I did. Croft was the man who nearly got 40 sailors killed in the Orion incident, an incident I had survived by defying his direct order. The same Croft who'd slithered into a cozy post-retirement career as a defense consultant, hiding behind a thin veil of credibility. That Croft. My father continued, his tone shifting, turning familiar, cold, tactical. He mentioned that a little insight from someone inside procurement might help the process move more smoothly. Not anything official, of course. Just guidance. Silence. Emily, I sat frozen. Every trace of warmth from that call evaporated like steam off an open deck. It wasn't a check-in. It wasn't a reconnection. It was a setup. I wasn't his daughter. I was a potential asset. Let me be absolutely clear, I said, each word clipped and precise. What you're asking is unethical. It's illegal. And it violates everything I've sworn to uphold. There was a pause, just long enough for the weight of my words to settle. Then his voice returned, colder than I'd heard in years. No need to be dramatic. And he hung up. The room went quiet again. Except now it wasn't peaceful. It was surgical. A few hours later, my mother called. Of course she did. Elena, she began. Not Emily, not darling. You've disappointed your father. Her voice was rich with guilt and nostalgia, the weapon she always reached for first. You just don't understand what he's trying to do. Everything he builds for us, for Lauren, for the family. I closed my eyes. She went on. He only asked for a small favor, just a nudge. You always have to be so rigid, so military. Sometimes you need to be flexible for the people who love you, flexible for the people who love me. Her definition of love had always required compromise, my compromise. And then came Lauren. She called later that night. She didn't even try to disguise the performance. Emily, she sobbed. Mom told me what happened. How could you do that to Dad? He's so stressed he's barely sleeping. I didn't say a word. She took my silence as permission to keep going. I just want everything to be perfect. It's my wedding, my only one. You have your career, your medals, your legacy. Can't you let me have this? I nearly laughed. But it wasn't funny. It was mechanical. A script I'd heard for years. You're strong, Emily. You don't need the spotlight. Let someone else have the moment. She talked about the cost of flowers, the honeymoon suite in Bora Bora, the pressure of guest lists and table settings, how stressed she was. I listened. Not because I cared, but because I needed to hear it one last time. The hierarchy of needs in the Calhoun family. Lauren's wedding, national security. Richard's investment portfolio, military ethics. My sole negotiable. Please, she whimpered. Don't ruin this for me. And that was the moment. Not when my father asked me to break federal law. Not when my mother scolded me for holding the line. It was Lauren's tears that did it. Not because they moved me, but because I realized she truly believed I owed her something. That I was just an accessory she could call in when convenient and silence when she needed center stage. That night I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I planned. I sat down at my desk and opened my encrypted laptop. I didn't want revenge. Revenge is messy, emotional. It leaves too much to chance. I wanted precision. I wanted clarity. I wanted the truth. And I was going to deliver it. At her wedding, I spent weeks searching for the right gift. Not from a registry, not something ornamental or easy to forget. Something with weight not just in the hand, but in the heart. Something that said I remember where we came from even if you've rewritten the story. I found it in an antique shop just outside Annapolis. A brass maritime compass from the 1940s still housed in its original navy velvet case. It had a quiet heft to it, the kind passed down through generations without needing a price tag. I had it engraved August 12, 2024, Chapel Point, Port Clarendon, coordinates of the little chapel where our grandparents were married, a symbol of guidance, of legacy, of a beginning they pretended to honor but never really understood. I brought the box with me to the rehearsal dinner. Not wrapped, not adorned, just polished and steady in my hand. The room was glowing with candlelight and curated charm, everything carefully arranged for social media moments and society whispers. I waited for the right time, not out of dramatics, but precision. During a lull between courses, I walked to the front. Lauren was laughing, caught in conversation with a friend, a diamond bracelet glittering on her wrist. "Hi," I said gently. She turned, blinking like she hadn't realized I was there. "I wanted to give you something," I said, extending the box. She opened it without ceremony, looked inside. Her expression stayed neutral. "Oh," she murmured. "Thanks." She closed the box without reading the engraving. Set it on the table beside her bread plate, just inches from a used butter knife. Seconds later, someone leaned in to compliment her bracelet. She beamed, lifted her arm. "David gave it to me earlier. Isn't it gorgeous?" The compass was forgotten before the sentence ended. I stood still for a beat longer, not waiting for recognition, just witnessing the moment, the clarity that follows when the last thread snaps. Back at my seat, I sipped sparkling water and watched. Eventually, a server began clearing the plates. I saw his hand sweep near the bread dish. He almost picked it up with the rest, napkins, silverware, and the small blue box that had once held meaning. I rose from the table, crossed the room quietly, and retrieved it before he could. He gave a polite nod. Didn't ask. I walked out of the restaurant without saying goodbye. Outside, the air was colder than I expected. The harbor wind cut through my jacket like it had been waiting for me. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I walked. Down the boardwalk, past the yachts and the cameras and the laughter. I walked until the sky stretched wide and the ocean opened up in front of me. Black. Endless. Honest. I took the compass out of my coat pocket. It felt heavier now, not because it had failed, but because it had told me something I needed to know. I had brought a piece of our history. She had treated it like clutter. That was the truth. That was the end. 25 years of shrinking myself, apologizing, waiting for acknowledgement. And now a single careless motion had confirmed everything they'd tried to deny. I stood on the edge of the dock, eyes on the Atlantic. I didn't make a vow. I made a decision. They wanted a perfect wedding. They'd get one. But I'd be bringing the truth with me. I didn't sleep that night. Not out of rage, but purpose. Somewhere between the discarded compass and the quiet click of the door behind me, something had shifted. This was no longer about family. It wasn't even about dignity. It was about truth. And I knew exactly where to begin. At 0200 hours, I powered on the encrypted laptop I travel with for deployment readiness. A familiar hum filled the room as the system booted. The screen's glow cast long, sharp lines across the hotel wallpaper. I felt steady, detached. The same way I felt on long watches steering steel through ice. I opened the secure comms channel. Ben Carter answered on the first ring. He didn't ask why I was calling in the middle of the night. He didn't comment on the soft undertone of steel in my voice. He simply said, "Yes, Admiral, I need everything you can find on Vice Admiral Rylan Croft. I want full detail on the Orion incident, unedited command logs, safety override records, preliminary sonar tests. I want names, transcripts, source files. Cross-reference with anything tied to my father's company. Contracts, PAC contributions, executive affiliations, all of it." There was no hesitation. "Roger that," Ben said. 12 hours. I closed the lid. That's the thing about loyalty earned in salt water and silence. It never asks why. It moves. While Ben pulled thread from the government side, I turned to the present. I pulled up the engagement party photos from Lauren's public album, the kind she'd thoughtlessly shared, tagging luxury brands and quoting love poems that sounded like they came from a napkin in a bridal boutique. I zoomed in on one shot, her standing on the veranda with our parents holding a champagne glass. Her hand rested near a locket. I remembered seeing it earlier but hadn't paid it any mind. This time I looked closely. The locket was ornate gold, clearly vintage, but something about it felt off, bulky, too thick for pure ornament. Along the side edge was a subtle seam, small, nearly invisible, but unmistakable. Croft's foundation had gifted it to her. That much was captioned in a photo. He didn't do generosity, he did leverage. I screen captured the image and sent it to Ben with one line, "Analyze object." High priority. The locket wasn't just jewelry. And this wedding wasn't just a family insult anymore. It was a staging ground. I stood at the window again, watching the lights from the marina flicker in the early morning mist. This town had always wrapped itself in respectability, old money-polished shoes, gossip disguised as tradition. But under all that rot, Croft's voice haunted me, still calm and clinical, as he stood on the bridge during Orion, calculating human lives against optics. The potential loss of life is an acceptable risk. I had overridden him that day. I had disobeyed a direct order, and it saved 37 souls. But the cost, he walked away unscathed, promoted quietly before retirement. I was investigated for insubordination. My clearance reviewed. My record flagged until someone smarter realized burying me would cost more than letting me survive. Croft slithered out of uniform and into advisory roles, defense think tanks, contractor boards. A consultant now where the real money hides behind acronyms and tax codes. He didn't just want money, he wanted control. And now he had his claws in my family. I would rip them out. By 06:30, a secure message appeared in my inbox from Ben. Subject line, Orion, original logs, for your eyes only. I opened it. The documents were raw, unredacted, loud with the truth. Croft had overridden safety recommendations to push the USS Orion into a known unstable trench during a sonar demonstration for private investors. The goal showcased a new frequency mapping system, months before it was ready. The sonar glitched. The ship fell into comms blackout. Croft's voice, recorded in the audio logs, was chilling. Maintain perimeter, control the narrative, acceptable risk, acceptable risk. He'd said that about sailors, about my crew. And then I heard my own voice. Negative command, I'm assuming control. Initiating emergency ascent. All hands prepare for rescue protocol. I remembered that moment. The burn of adrenaline, the silent nod from my XO. The cold certainty that if I obeyed, they would die. We saved them. And Croft had tried to rewrite the aftermath pin, the blame muddy the command structure. He failed. But he hadn't stopped. My hands curled into fists as I scanned the documents. One name caught my eye. Captain David Egan, the original CO of the Orion. He'd been retired quietly after the incident. Pushed out according to Scuttlebutt with a health leave that no one really explained. I ran a quick search. He lived in Mystic, Connecticut, just 2 hours from here. I dialed the number listed on a local veterans board. A gravelly voice answered. Captain Egan, I asked. This is he. It's Rear Admiral Emily Calhoun. You may remember me as Commander Calhoun. Orion. A long silence. Then his voice softened. I'd never forget you. I need your help, I said. You don't even have to ask, he replied. And just like that, I had what Croft never saw coming. Truth, credibility, and a witness. I stood and walked to the uniform hanging by the window. Today they'd finalize flowers and table linens. I was preparing a court-martial. I arrived at the cafe in Mystic just before noon. It was the kind of place that served fish chowder with fresh cornbread and black coffee in chipped ceramic mugs. The kind of place where no one cared about the stock market, only the tide. Captain David Egan was already seated near the window, wearing a soft wool sweater and the weight of someone who had seen too much and spoken too little. He looked up when I approached, then stood not out of formality but something deeper. Respect, maybe. Or memory. Admiral Calhoun, he said. David, I replied. We shook hands. His grip was steady. I wasn't sure you'd remember me, I admitted. I remember the sound of your voice cutting through chaos, he said. Some things stay. We sat. The waitress brought us coffee, no questions asked. It felt like a scene from another life, the kind I used to imagine civilians had all the time. I found the unedited files, I said, pulling out a secured tablet, Croft's override orders, the sonar specs, your original logs. Egan nodded. I wrote 3 full reports. They buried every one of them. The Navy gave me early retirement and a quiet warning, said it was for my own protection. They tried the same with me, I said. Only I wouldn't go quietly. His eyes lit with something like pride. You did what I couldn't, he said. You refused to disappear. I turned the screen toward him. I want you to be there tomorrow, at the ceremony, in person. Egan took a slow sip of coffee. And do what exactly? Tell the truth. His eyebrows lifted slightly. You want to ruin a wedding. I want to ruin a cover-up. He leaned back, folding his arms. Croft's gonna be there, I nodded. So are my parents, my sister, half the Northeast elite. And you? I held his gaze. In full dress whites. Last row. No microphone. No speech. Just presence. Egan smiled faintly. You Navy women never do anything halfway. I didn't respond. I'll be there, he said after a moment. And I'll speak. Not because of Croft, but because of you. I nodded once. Thank you. We finished our coffee in silence. There was nothing else to say. On the way back to Port Clarendon, I stopped at a drugstore to pick up some last-minute items, nail polish remover, spare hairpins, breath mints. All the mundane things women are told to carry on big days. It felt absurd. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't performing. I was executing. Back at the hotel, Ben was waiting in the lobby. He had driven up from Norfolk. He didn't say anything when he saw me, just nodded and handed me a flash drive. Everything's on there, timed, synced, your technician's in place. What about Croft? I asked. He's staying at the Harborview Club, Suite 807. He's scheduled to arrive at the venue tomorrow at 10:45 a.m., and the AV secured. Our guy's on the vendor list. He'll trigger it on your signal. Egan confirmed. We took the elevator to my floor. Ben carried his own garment bag, white uniform, just like mine. I'm not asking you to stand, I said, unlocking my door. I know, he said, but I will. I laid the flash drive on the desk. Across from it, the compass sat polished perfect still, bearing the scratches from its brief moment among the discarded. Ben noticed it. You salvaged it, he said. No, I replied. You did. He didn't argue. Instead, he stepped to the window and looked out over the gray stretch of Atlantic beyond the rooftops. I've stood beside you through storms, Admiral, but this one's different. I joined him. It's not weather, I said. It's legacy. He nodded. And then you ready for the fallout? I've lived in their shadow my whole life. Time they stepped into mine. That night I ironed my uniform myself, pressed the seams, polished the insignia, checked the ribbons 3 times. Then I laid it across the bed and sat beside it in silence. This wasn't vengeance. It wasn't drama. It was correction. They had written me out of the story. Tomorrow I'd remind them who the author really was. The morning of the wedding dawned gray and humid, the kind of New England summer day that feels like it can't decide between celebration and storm. I dressed in silence. Each movement was methodical, practiced. White trousers, pressed jacket, gloves folded with care. My name tag gleamed just below the 2 silver stars on my shoulders. I pinned my hair back secure and invisible. No perfume, no jewelry, Nothing that wasn't earned. The only adornment I allowed myself was the compass. I tucked it carefully into the inner pocket of my jacket. Not as a symbol, not as a weapon, as a reminder. By the time I arrived at the Chandler, the valet gave a low whistle as I stepped out of the car. He didn't speak, but he didn't have to. His posture shifted. His hands moved with more purpose. Power, when worn correctly, doesn't need to raise its voice. Inside the grand ballroom, it was chaos dressed in couture. Floral arrangements were being rolled into place. A string quartet tuned their instruments in the corner. Waitstaff in white gloves moved quickly, heads-down trays balanced with military precision. I moved through them like I belonged, and I did, though not in the way they expected. No one greeted me. Lauren didn't look up when I entered. She stood near the altar, surrounded by bridesmaids in soft champagne-colored dresses, her hands fluttering like she was conducting an orchestra only she could hear. My mother, Eleanor, wore a pale lilac sheath and a smile that could slice granite. She glanced in my direction once, then turned back to her clipboard. My father was already deep in conversation with Croft. That man hadn't aged a day. His uniform now was a tailored civilian suit, but his posture gave him away. Spine like a steel rod, arrogance poured into every syllable. He didn't see me, not yet. Chloe, the planner, scurried up to me. "Admiral," she whispered, flushed. "Your seat is, over here. Last row on the far left." "Thank you," I said, voice calm. I walked past every guest in that cathedral of white roses and polished crystal. I could feel the eyes, curious, confused, calculating. Rear Admiral wasn't printed on the program. I sat, alone. Back row, near the emergency exit. Exactly where they thought I belonged. Ben entered 2 minutes later in his own dress whites. No one recognized him yet. He took his place along the side aisle near the AV tech station. He didn't look at me, didn't nod. We were both trained better than that. The music began, soft, predictable, expensive. The ceremony unfolded like a stage play. Lauren glided down the aisle, her dress trailing behind her in waves of tulle and pride. The guests turned, sighed, whispered. My parents stood with beaming expressions. Croft applauded with polite enthusiasm. The officiant welcomed everyone with a warm voice and practiced smile. And then it came. As we gather in the spirit of love and commitment, we would also like to take a moment to honor those who serve in our nation's armed forces. That was the signal. Ben stepped forward. His heels clicked once on the polished floor as he turned sharply to face the back of the room. To face me. He raised his right hand to his brow in a salute, crisp, flawless, deliberate. And then he spoke. "Rear Admiral Emily Calhoun, ma'am." A hush fell over the room like a velvet curtain. For 3 seconds, there was nothing but breath and disbelief. Then the whispers began. "Rear Admiral here in uniform, back row." Lauren turned, her veil swishing with the sudden motion. My mother's jaw tightened. My father blinked like someone had slapped him in front of a crowd. Croft turned halfway just as the screens flanking the altar flickered. Gone were the pastel photos of the happy couple. In their place, sonar schematics, real-time tactical readouts, audio logs, the sonar map from the Orion disaster. The crowd gasped. Croft's voice played cold and precise. "The potential loss of life is an acceptable risk. Maintain narrative control." Then my voice followed resolute negative command. Overriding order. Initiate rescue protocols. The room exploded in noise, shock, confusion, alarm. Croft surged to his feet. "This is slander," he shouted. "Fabricated data. A security breach." My father stood as well, eyes darting around the room like he was calculating who to silence first. But before they could spin the lie, a third voice rang out from the middle aisle. "I am Captain David Egan, formerly of the USS Orion." The crowd stilled again. He walked forward slowly, his cane tapping with purpose. "I was there. That recording is real. That footage is real. Vice Admiral Croft left us for dead." He turned to me, eyes, clear voice, unwavering. "And that woman, Rear Admiral Calhoun? She disobeyed a coward to save lives, mine included." Then without ceremony, he raised his hand in a slow, deliberate salute. And the room finally was silent. Captain Egan's hand remained at his brow, trembling slightly, but the salute was steady. The kind that only means one thing: reverence. Across the ballroom, the chaos that had begun just moments ago froze into something sharper. A reckoning. Every guest, every florist, every caterer with a tray of shrimp skewers. They all stood caught between disbelief and dawning realization. Phones rose like a wave cameras, locking onto the front of the room where Croft stood rooted, and then back to the far row where I sat unmoving in my dress whites. Rear Admiral, not a guest, not an add-on, not an afterthought. My mother clutched her necklace knuckles white. My father's mouth opened, but no words came. Lauren had gone still at the altar veil, trembling at her shoulders, her expression a collapsing empire of shock and fury. Ben lowered his hand, then turned sharply and gave a subtle nod to the technician stationed behind the flower-covered lectern. The audio cut back in. Now it wasn't Croft or me. It was raw footage, grainy reel from the deep-sea rescue. Divers in cold black water. Emergency beacons pulsing. Sailors exhausted clinging to rigging as the hull of the USS Orion was slowly pulled to safety. One of the final frames showed the bridge of the ship, my face partially obscured, sweat on my brow, issuing rapid-fire orders in the dim red light of emergency power. It was undeniable. It was truth. Croft made a move toward the technician toward the AV rig, but he was stopped cold. Ben Carter stepped directly into his path. No words, no threat, just presence. And behind Ben, two other officers I recognized from previous deployments stood shoulder to shoulder, forming a quiet wall of authority. Croft looked at them, then at me, and for the first time I saw something behind his eyes. Not arrogance, fear. My father spoke up then, his voice high and strained, cutting through the silence like a blade that couldn't find purchase. This is an orchestrated attack. This is personal. It's a family vendetta. Egan turned to him, his voice as calm as surf. No, sir. This is accountability. Something your daughter has lived by and you've ignored for a very long time. Lauren stepped forward, the soft fabric of her dress swishing with each uneven stride. Her makeup had cracked. Her eyes glittered not from joy but from tears held in by force. Emily, she said. Not M, not Sis, not even Admiral. Just my name said like a question she didn't know how to finish. I stood. The entire room turned with me like a weather vane shifting in a storm. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Egan had spoken. The footage had spoken. My rank, my uniform, they had done what 25 years of trying to belong never could. I walked down the aisle, not slowly, not for show, just steadily toward the altar where my sister stood frozen. I passed my mother, who refused to meet my eyes, and my father, who stepped aside without realizing he had. As I reached the front, Lauren whispered, "Why are you doing this?" I met her eyes. She was still beautiful, still carefully composed, still balancing a world that had always been tilted in her favor. "I'm not ruining your wedding," I said softly. "I'm ending the lie it was built on." She said nothing, but she didn't look away. Croft turned to retreat, jaw clenched, but behind him came another sound, clear-clipped and unyielding. Vice Admiral Ryland Croft. Two voices in unison. Federal agents. Civilian suits with badges drawn. You are under arrest for falsification of defense records, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to defraud the United States government. Gasps, not dramatic ones, real ones. The sound of prestige turning to rust. They cuffed him before he could speak, before my father could lunge, before my mother could manufacture another line of defense. The metal clicked shut. It was louder than the music had been all morning. Croft turned one last time, not to them, to me. He looked at me like a man seeing his own reflection for the first time, and not liking what stared back. They walked him out through the side aisle, escorted by agents and cameras alike. Ben followed, not to guard, but to witness. Lauren's hands hung limp at her sides now. Her veil had slipped slightly, and one earring was missing. She looked like a woman standing in the ruins of something she thought would last forever. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel anything. Only weightlifting, truth clearing the fog, and somewhere deep in the pocket of my jacket, the compass sat warm against my chest. I turned, faced the crowd, and walked the length of the ballroom again, this time not to be seated, but to leave. No one stopped me. No one called my name, but every eye followed me out. And behind me, the illusion collapsed. They moved us to a private room off the ballroom, one of those polished drawing rooms, lined with antique furniture no one actually uses. Security had locked the doors behind us. Inside were only the remnants my parents Lauren Croft now cuffed, and silent 2 agents and me. For a moment no one said anything. Then my mother exploded. "How dare you," she hissed, crossing the room in 3 sharp steps. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Her heels clicked like accusations against the hardwood floor. "You ruined her wedding. You humiliated this family." My father sat hunched in a brocade armchair, the color drained from his face, fingers trembling near his temple, like a man trying to will himself invisible. Lauren stood near the window, motionless, like if she moved too quickly, the entire room would come apart. I didn't answer. My mother's voice rose higher. "You think wearing that uniform makes you righteous, that it gives you permission to destroy everything we've built?" I turned to her, calm and cold. "A reputation built on lies isn't worth preserving, Mother. It's a prison. And today I stepped out of it." Her mouth opened, closed. She looked lost for the first time in my life. Then my father found his voice. "You'll pay for this, Emily. I swear to God you will pay." I met his eyes. "Are you threatening a rear admiral while sitting next to a man in federal custody?" His mouth snapped shut like a steel trap. Lauren finally moved. She crossed the room slowly, the train of her dress dragging like dead weight behind her. She stopped a foot away, mascara-smudged voice, trembling. "Please," she whispered. "Just take it back. Say it was a mistake. That you were upset. That this was some emotional reaction." I looked down at her hand. She had reached for my arm, the same hand that had brushed the compass aside like clutter. The same hand that had held a glass of champagne when I stood in silence at the back of every family event. "Your perfect day," I said gently, "was built on a foundation of silence. You used my honor like a bargaining chip." Her lip quivered. "David doesn't even know what's happening," she said. "He just thinks you're bitter." I gave her a small, sad smile. "No, Lauren, I'm not bitter. I'm done." Then I reached up and gently removed her hand from my sleeve. A clean final gesture. The 2 agents stepped forward, then rechecking Croft's cuffs. One of them, tall, unsmiling, read him his rights again, slower this time, like it mattered now. My father groaned softly. My mother sat finally, her spine curved inward as if something inside her had snapped and couldn't quite reset. I turned toward the door. "Emily," my mother said behind me, her voice quiet now, a strange blend of command and desperation. "Where are you going?" I didn't look back. I placed one hand on the door frame, my fingers brushing the carved molding like punctuation. "I'm going where I belong," I said, voice clear, final. "And it's not here." Then I opened the door and walked out. Down the hallway, past startled hotel staff, past open-mouthed guests still buzzing with fragments of what they'd just witnessed. The air outside had shifted. The storm had passed. The sky was clear. I didn't pause. Not until I reached the edge of the cliff walk overlooking the water. There I stopped. Not for drama, for breath. And that's when I heard it. Footsteps behind me. Measured, familiar. Ben. He said nothing. Just stood beside me, hands behind his back. "They'll spin it," I said after a while. "Try to make it a breakdown, a betrayal. They'll fail," he replied. "Too many eyes, too much evidence." And Egan, already in a federal vehicle en route to D.C. He's giving a statement. I nodded. We stood there for a long time. No words, no medals. Just 2 officers and the sea. I didn't go anywhere after the ceremony. I returned to my hotel, changed out of the uniform, and sat by the window without turning on the lights. The city outside buzzed faintly, wedding guests leaving in awkward clusters, taxis arriving too late, laughter trying too hard to be real. But inside, it was quiet. Not the sharp quiet of anger. The deep, hollow quiet that follows when you've told the truth, and the world has no immediate answer. I rested my hands on the windowsill. They weren't shaking. They weren't triumphant either. Just still, I had done what I came to do. Exposed a truth no one wanted to hear in a room full of people who preferred a prettier lie. And now the air had changed. Not because anything exploded, but because now no one could pretend they didn't know. I reached into my coat and pulled out the compass. The velvet box sat warm in my palm. Scuffed now, slightly frayed at the corners, it didn't look like a gift anymore. It looked like a keepsake, a marker, not of what they lost, but of what I chose to carry. I thought of Ben's question. You prepared for the fallout, I'd assumed. Fallout meant chaos, people yelling, doors slamming, family estranged. But the real fallout was this stillness. No more wondering if I should have said something. No more hope that someone else would do it for me. No more shrinking. Just the quiet weight of having done the right thing. It didn't feel like closure. It felt like altitude, like standing at the top of something and realizing the ground you'd been climbing wasn't home. That it was never meant to be. The compass caught a sliver of moonlight. I turned it in my hand. It still worked. Still pointed north. Even after being tossed aside. Even after being treated like an afterthought. Like me, I closed the box gently, set it on the windowsill, and breathed slow, steady, full. Not because the fight was over, but because I was no longer fighting to be seen. The wedding was canceled by sunset. A vague announcement circulated online the next day, crafted with the kind of PR spin my father had always excelled at. Due to unforeseen circumstances, the Calhoun-Halpern ceremony has been postponed. Postponed. As if it had tripped on a crack in the sidewalk instead of collapsing under the weight of decades of lies. Within 48 hours, the fallout spread like oil on water. Croft's legal team tried to discredit the footage. They failed. The chain of custody on the audio logs was airtight. Egan's testimony made national headlines. 3 more retired officers came forward to corroborate what happened aboard Orion. By Monday, the Department of Defense had opened a formal inquiry into multiple contracts Croft had influenced after retirement, including one linked directly to my father's investment firm. He didn't issue a statement, but news broke that 2 of his board members had resigned. One of his biggest clients pulled out. The company's website quietly went offline. And just like that, the empire they'd spent a lifetime building began to unravel. I didn't gloat. I didn't speak to the press. I didn't reach out to Lauren or my mother or anyone in that circle. But I did read one message. It came from a woman named Sarah. Her husband had been one of the divers who helped recover Orion's forward hatch. She sent a photo Granny scanned from a disposable camera. It showed him kneeling beside the ship, still in his wetsuit, grinning through exhaustion. She wrote, "He always said you were the reason they made it home. Thank you for bringing the truth to light." That message hit harder than any headline ever could, because it reminded me why I chose this life in the first place. Not for approval, not for glory, but for the promise, quiet, sacred, that leadership means standing when others look away. Back at the base, I returned to routine. No parades, no interviews, just the rhythm of service personnel reports, fleet readiness drills, joint briefings, normalcy. One afternoon weeks later, I found Ben in the operations lounge. He was reviewing a logistics packet, but he looked up when I entered. "Everything settling?" he asked. "Mostly. And your family?" I thought about that for a moment. "They lost something," I said. He nodded. "And you?" "I didn't lose them," I replied. "They were never really mine to lose." He looked at me not with pity but understanding, and that was enough. The war I fought wasn't for revenge, it was for clarity. And sometimes that's the only peace worth having. It was early autumn when the letter arrived, heavy paper, gold seal, no preamble. An invitation not from my family or any press outlet, but from Annapolis. They were unveiling a new plaque in Memorial Hall. For the first time, the Orion incident would be publicly acknowledged. And along with it, the names of those who had saved lives that day, not through orders, but through defiance. My name was on that plaque. So was Captain Egan's. And the names of every crew member who had stood with me when Croft would have let them drown. I flew up alone, no uniform this time. Just a navy blue coat and a calm that had taken me nearly 2 decades to earn. The ceremony was small. No cameras, no spotlights. Just a quiet gathering in the marble hall, where names whispered from the walls, carved in silence and reverence. Ben was there, standing at the edge of the crowd, his posture as precise as always, even in civilian clothes. When they removed the cloth from the plaque, I stepped forward. I didn't cry. I just traced the letters with my fingers. Not to prove they were real, but to remind myself I was. Afterward, Egan joined me. He wore a tweed jacket, hands tucked in his pockets. "You ever think we'd see this day?" he asked. I shook my head. "Not like this. Not with the truth intact." He smiled. Funny how long it takes history to catch up. We stood there a moment longer. Then he placed a hand on my shoulder. Proud of you, Admiral. I looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a ghost in someone else's story. I felt seen. Later that evening, I sat alone at the harbor, near my quarters in Norfolk. The sun had set, leaving only streaks of purple and fire across the water. I pulled the compass from my coat pocket, the one Lauren had nearly thrown away. It still worked, still pointed true. I set it down beside me on the bench and breathed in the briny air. They could keep their photo albums, their heirlooms, their carefully edited legacies. I had this, a brass compass, a name etched in marble, and a life built not on inheritance, but on decision. When I stood up, I slipped the compass back into my pocket. Not because I needed it to guide me, but because now, finally, I knew where I was going. My story didn't end with an arrest or a plaque. It didn't end in a ballroom or a courtroom. It ended, or maybe began again, with peace. The kind of peace that comes not from resolution, but from no longer needing one. For most of my life, I fought to be seen by the people who claimed to love me. I tried to speak their language, to earn their pride, to fold my sharp corners into the soft script of their legacy. I stood at the edges of holiday photos, signed birthday cards they never read, sent home medals they never displayed. But the truth is, some people will never see you until they need something from you. And when they can't use you, they'll erase you. I stopped letting that define me. In the months after the wedding, life quieted. My father's firm restructured. Croft's trial moved forward with federal oversight. My mother's name faded from society pages. Lauren, I don't know what she tells people now. Maybe that I ruined everything. Or maybe she's learning finally how to live without a cover story. Either way, I let it go. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need reconciliation. What I needed I found in the silence of a ship's deck, in the quiet nod of a crewman, in a little girl's crayon drawing of a stick figure in a white uniform labeled Admiral Emily. What I needed was to reclaim my narrative, and I did. My legacy isn't a dinner toast or a family crest. It's not pearls in a velvet box. It's not even the rank on my collar. It's the lives I helped bring home. It's the sailors who still call me ma'am with respect instead of obligation. It's the truth written now in places that can't be quietly rearranged. A few weeks ago, I walked past my desk and saw the compass sitting there, steady waiting. I picked it up. The engraving is still sharp. August 12, 2024, Chapel Point, Port Clarendon. It once marked a wedding that never happened. Now it marks the day I stopped asking permission to be myself. I no longer wear it out of sentimentality. I wear it because it points me forward. That's what legacy really is. Not what they leave you, but what you choose to carry. So if you've been erased, if you've been told to shrink yourself to fit into someone else's story, if your honor, your truth, your name has been treated like an embarrassment, I want you to know something. You're not the problem. You're the compass. And no matter how far they push you off course, you can still find your way back to yourself. So draw your line, steady your hand, and walk it eyes forward, shoulders back. Your story doesn't need their permission, only your own.